Welcome, everybody. This is a joint hearing of the House Commerce and Economic Development Committee, did I get that right?
Yeah.
And House General and Housing Committees. And today is still Thursday, February 13th, 2025. And it's just a little after 1 o'clock in the afternoon. We're convening to continue our exploration of tax increment financing proposals. And today we're going to hear from Let's Build Homes, a coalition which has prepared its own concept for our consideration. So at this point, who is going to testify for, is it going to be you?
I'll kick things off, yeah.
Miro, have a seat. I think, is it safe to say that you know the people in this room?
You know, I
Would you like us to introduce ourselves?
No, I appreciate, we did that last time I came to your committee, and I've watched some of the rest of you who I haven't met, so I think
So
we're
you
good.
know us better than you'd like to. All right. Well, in that case, would you state your name for the record and take it away?
Yes, hi. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Moreau Weinberg, and I am here representing Let's Build Homes. I'm serving as the executive chair of this new coalition of Vermont individuals and organizations that is coming together to advocate for pro-housing public policies at the state level, at the regional level, and at the local level. I would say well, first of all, I want to say, I did get a chance to speak to the House General and Housing Committee just after we had launched, and I'm pleased to say that in the weeks since then, this coalition has grown quite dramatically. There are now nearly 700 Vermont individuals and organizations that have kind of formally signed on to this coalition. And if you're interested who those are, I won't list them all here, but you can go to the letsbuildhomes.org website and see that growing coalition there. And hopefully someone watching will consider joining us as well. I do want to say my testimony is also informed by having served as an affordable housing developer myself for 15 years, leading up to being elected the mayor of Burlington. We built homes in Vermont, New Hampshire, and New York. And as mayor, I was very focused on housing as well. We increased housing production 400% over the 12 years that I was in office, and it was something that we are, very focused on. Since leaving office, I've continued to work on housing, both as a visiting fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School Center for State and Local Government, called Taubman Center, and as a consultant to a couple of Vermont housing projects. So with that, let me see if I can get this sharing going properly. Hey, and how about that? Great, okay. So, in addition to hearing from me, I'm joined today by David White of White & Burke. I'm really one of the leading, maybe the leading Vermont TIF expert. And we also have Zeke Davison from Summit Properties here as well. And both of them will participate in this presentation at times. Also, I think having watched a little bit of your past conversations, if there are implementation questions or questions about the financing, we invited Charlie Baker to be here from the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission, and I believe Michael Gahn is zooming in, or is going to try to zoom in for much of this, so there are resources for this testimony as well. So, to be clear, this housing infrastructure initiative that I'm going to speak to you today, that's what we're calling it. We've shortened that as HIT, is one of the top priorities right now for Let's Build Homes. We say that from this perspective. We are at a time where I think there's real consensus that we have a real need to build 30,000 homes over the next 5 years. That is a figure in the 2025 to 2029 Vermont Housing Financing Agency needs assessment that I know you're all familiar with. It's not going to be easy to meet that goal. It wouldn't be easy to meet that goal if times were good. That will require a more than doubling of the current levels of housing production. And we are attempting to do that at a time when projects are now facing headwinds that they didn't face in much of much of the last 20 years. There are very high interest rates right now, and there are high construction costs. A third challenge that this proposal is really focused on is the high cost of public infrastructure. So this housing infrastructure initiative, as we've proposed it, certainly is not going to address all of these issues, but we basically come from a perspective that no one thing is going to solve this crisis. We have sort of gotten our way into this shortage through a lot of decisions, and it's going to take a lot of incremental efforts to turn it around. And this one is focused on addressing that high cost of public infrastructure. Our sense of this issue is that Vermont has very limited public infrastructure currently. There's not a lot of good data on this. Hopefully I have the best data we've been able to pull together for this presentation, and I think it's something probably that requires further investigation and scrutiny, but the data that is available, I think, paints a stark picture. There are more than 200 villages that lack community wastewater disposal systems. We have more than 100 Vermont villages that don't have public water systems. There have been many efforts to build this public infrastructure in the past, and many of those have not succeeded for lack of funding. That's a quote there from A&R's website. The League of Cities and Towns recently did a survey of its members to try to get a sense of the public infrastructure challenge, and this is defined bigger than I just give you those water and wastewater examples, but other basic public infrastructure that I'm talking about also includes roads, sidewalks, and parks in some cases. And here's what the response to the survey said, that 88 municipalities, or about a third of Vermont's municipalities, responded. 35 reported that they have active efforts to try to expand their water or sewer systems. And they've been active at trying to get state and federal funding. They have received some, but you can see there that there's a substantial gap between what they've been able to secure so far and what the need is of just these responding communities. I think an important point that I certainly experienced as Mayor of Burlington is that even in areas where we do have substantial existing public infrastructure, often if you're going to build a bunch of new homes, there is a need for a big infrastructure upgrade. And certainly if people are familiar with the City Place project, part of why that was such a public project is we were attempting to build about $20 million in public infrastructure at the same time that some 400 homes are being built. Happy to say that project is now going forward at full speed. The way it often works, not always, but often works currently, is when a new project comes forward that requires either an upgrade or new public infrastructure to be built. One way that is often treated is to ask the builder to pay for all of those costs as an additional project cost. That can, depending on what the circumstances of that project are, can be feasible, or it can be a major additional hurdle, major additional barrier to that project getting built. It can render a project infeasible without there being some assistance because of the added cost to the project. Looking to, I know the governor, and we welcome that the governor has a modest proposal for additional infrastructure spending in his budget proposal, but I believe that figure is $9 million. I just showed you what this, we're talking about a need that is hundreds of millions of dollars. It's hard to envision how state taxpayers, local taxpayers, existing ratepayers are really going to close that gap. An advantage of the Housing and Infrastructure Initiative, which we've proposed it, and the Governor's Spark proposal, is, in a very real sense, this structure allows these projects to self-fund. The new public revenues being generated by these projects would pay for this necessary infrastructure as we've proposed it. And I should say, I'm going to kind of give the kind of bigger picture of this, and then David White will speak to some of the nuts and bolts of how this works. I want to be clear that although there are certainly similarities, and I understand why, as we are reviewing Spark and HIT, we look to our experience with the TIF program as a kind of an analogy, but I do think it's important to understand that this is what we are proposing is not TIF. It is very different in a number of, I think, important respects. Maybe the most important may sound semantic, but I actually think it's maybe the essence of what we're trying to advocate for here is that whereas TIF is a kind of general tool that can be used by large communities in Vermont to meet a number of different public infrastructure needs, to meet a number of different development goals, and really, with this broader effort of building the grand list, the Housing Infrastructure Initiative is narrowly focused on being a tool to ensure the creation and accelerate the creation of new housing. And I think that my hope is that we have more consensus of the need for action here than perhaps there is about the grand list discussion. These are a couple figures from the VHFA Housing Needs Assessment. This is what they're saying. The green on the left, this is what they're saying we need to do to increase the current levels of production to meet these housing targets. And I found this other figure, 3.6 here, quite interesting in showing that you don't have to go back that far in Vermont's history to see a time when we were creating housing at a much higher rate than we are now. So, 3 times roughly the current rate of growth. Other ways that HIT differs from TIF. HIT, the way we've proposed this, and we haven't seen a draft come back from Legislative Council yet, but there is no longer the but-for grand list growth that has been the source of such debates in the past. The test really is not, are you granting, this debate over are you growing the grand list? It's, is housing benefiting, are housing projects benefiting from this, from a proposal or not? One of the big objections that I've always thought was reasonable, I think there are some objections to TIF that have been unreasonable. One of the ones that I've thought always was somewhat reasonable is that when, for the way Vermont somewhat uniquely does tax increment financing, this background growth that may or may not have been inspired in some way by the TIF investment is captured by the TIF district for a period of time. And that, some people, again, I think reasonably object to that and say that that is somehow diverting money from the education fund. This doesn't have that background growth issue at all, because it is only the only incremental revenue we're talking about is that is generated by these projects, not increment in the broader district. I think it is important to point out that as a sort of secondary benefit that I don't think it gets talked about enough in our TIF debates, the secondary benefit of HIT, the way we proposed it, is that it would lead to an expansion of public infrastructure, which I spoke to that being an issue today. The proposal will be far simpler and easier to administer than Vermont's traditional TIF districts. A big part of that is the fact that we're talking about just isolated, very identifiable properties as opposed to the district issues, which the drawing the lines on those districts and monitoring those lines is where a lot of the problems, administration problems, have come from in the past. Because HIT debt would be one-time debt, and we've proposed it that it would be debt that could be up to 80% of the new revenue at the start could be used to address that. Because this is a fixed amount of debt, and if you have questions about this, David White can speak to this further later. It is likely that over time, as tax rates go up, that the percentage of increment that would be needed to service that debt could be reduced over time. So sort of we propose it starting at 80%, but it may well drop over time. Which is not really a feature exactly of the way our current TIF districts work. And then an important discussion that I saw a really interesting conversation about this at the House Commerce Committee a couple days ago, is that we are proposing that, like many states, the financing mechanism could be done through the general obligation debt that all Vermont TIF projects have been done so far, but it would actually also open up the possibility of other types of debt being used. that are not backed by a general obligation bond. It could actually be debt that developers themselves go out and secure. And by structuring it in that way, and I think there are 32 states that allow this type of structure, it still would need to be paid off by essentially rebated taxes during the period of this of the hit debt, but at the it would be, the risk there would be on the builder, it would not be on taxpayers, and there could be some administrative efficiencies and savings as well. So we think that's an important small innovation of this. I'm almost done with my piece of this. I do just, having just spent the last few minutes trying to convince you this is not TIF, I do recognize that, and I've seen in the conversation so far that some of the same objections are, being discussed here, and that makes sense. I do think these stats are somewhat surprising when you think about the amount of time that we have spent, we collectively, certainly I was part of these debates as the mayor of Burlington, there's long been a lot of focus on and scrutiny on the diversion of revenues as a result of the TIF program. My understanding is the JFO is currently, for the current year, places that their estimate of that cost at $6.5 million. Maybe others would not characterize it this way, but it seems to me that really is a worst case scenario. That is really as if not all of that development would have happened anyways, and thus, and that's the way it's measured. Obviously there's real debate over that. It's hard for me to see how the projects that have gone forward that I've been directly involved in, to me, I think we clearly have seen grand lift gross. But even if you take that worst case scenario, you compare that to a couple of other programs that we debate a lot less, I think, about their impact on the ed fund. Current use cost the state, my understanding is an estimated $80 million a year, and the income sensitization of property taxes costs $160 million. So in that context, thinking about a new program that maybe for a period of time does arguably lead to some diversion of funds from the ed fund, I think it could be legitimate to think about doing that given the incredible need for housing right now. And I will say this is different than those other programs that I think there's at least a robust debate about how if we actually got back to the levels of housing production we had in the 80s, we'd have a much bigger grand list than we do today.
Yeah. Question for you, or just something, I want to put a question on the table. You don't have to answer it. We're familiar with the 6.5 million, and I understand that it assumes no but for argument. Let's say we were I'm not advocating that we do this, but just for thinking. Let's say we were creating a fund which would reimburse the ed fund for whatever the costs were. One of the things that I'm kind of curious about is how much would we dump into that fund going forward? I mean, if we're going to do this a lot more, and we want to start with an X $100 million worth of infrastructure, what does that mean? How much would you put into that conceptual box that says, well, this is what it would cost the ed fund over time? So I'm just putting that there.
Great. No, it's a very interesting question. I haven't quite thought of it that way, and we need to do a little analysis to really answer that.
I think it's worth it to ask that. I understand fully that the but for argument, and personally I happen to believe it's a better argument in Vermont than it was where I spent a lot of my life in California, but and I think it's a good one. And I understand you're saying we need housing so badly that skip but for and just say it's housing and that's enough. But I'm still curious, I think it would be good to know what that is.
Great.
Or
Okay,
order of magnitude. I mean, is it 25 million?
Right.
Is it 100 million? What is it?
Great. We will, we'll follow up on that. We'll probe that. At this point, to give a kind of real-world example of how a tool like this could change a specific project, we invited Zeke Davison at Summit Properties to kind of show how this would impact a project they're currently working on, currently building in Middlebury.
Oh, good. I get to talk before David jumps into technicalities of HIT. This is a treat for me. Thank you all. My name is Zeke Davison, COO of Summit Properties. I know I spoke to about half of you yesterday, but it was on the screen, so I apologize if I don't recognize you all, but happy to be here today in the sun, in the snow. We are the state's largest private developer of affordable housing and mixed income communities. We manage about 1,400 units across New Hampshire, Vermont, and upstate New York. Most of those are in Vermont. Of the 1,400 we manage, about 1,000 have some affordability component to them. We got our start early on in the tax credit, the low-income housing tax credit program, which was part of the '86 tax reform bill. Started doing independent senior living communities as mixed income communities in the '90s. Spent the next 20 years doing that type of community, and then the last 10 years or so really focused on non-age restricted multifamily affordable housing in single buildings. We've just started a project in Middlebury and had a grand opening last week called Stonecrop Meadows that I'll sort of use as an example today. It's a 250 unit master planned community. I mean, it's the largest non-Chittenden County new development in a generation, in decades. And it in large part was made possible because one, there was a lot of ARPA funding coming out of COVID, and two, there's a large motivated employer in Middlebury, in the college that's having real existential housing problems. Those two things coming together really allowed us to do a once in a generation project. I'm going to use that as an example to talk in a second. Yeah, you can hold off in 1 second. But I think for us to all step back and use this project through the lens, the whole point I'm hoping to articulate for you all is we need to leverage future tax funds for development now. I was just on the side crunching numbers. I think it's actually 40,000, Moreau, that the HFA and ACCD are saying we need to build to have a healthy vacancy rate, decrease homelessness. And
I kind of have a range, so
yes.
Depends on where in the range.
Well, I'll take the top end of the range.
Yeah.
I asked Chad while we were sitting there to figure out what 40,000 new homes would be as a percentage of our current housing stock. I think it was 330,000 homes currently in the state of Vermont. That's about a 12% growth. I was looking at your decade, we went from 2% down to 0.6%. I think what that really underlies is that there's really no potential future tax base without new development, and we're not doing new development. So I think the point of this conversation is that if we can spur new development, we're not robbing the ed fund, we're not robbing municipal taxes, we need to spur new growth in some way in order to grow our grand list. And so overall, I think the lens through which we look is that leveraging future tax growth is how we have to look at it. The alternative, 40,000 new homes, $500,000 a unit, that's $20 billion worth of housing investment we need in the state. We, at this project I'll introduce you to in a second, of the first 80 units we're building, it's about a $50 million, $52 million project. And my wife yells at me for throwing out numbers and doing math, so I apologize. 30 million of it is state resources that we competitively got, either ARPA funding, a tax credit allocation. And so that, for the first 80 units at $30 million in state resources, that's about $350,000 per unit. So even if a tenth of those $40,000 homes we need are in mixed income or affordable, that would be $3.5 billion in state cash and scarce resources over the next 5 years to come close to hitting our needs and goals. And I think the point of articulating that is that's not going to happen. And you all know that's not going to happen. And really what we need to look at is if we're going to make a dent, leveraging against future tax dollars that otherwise will not come in because we simply are not growing the state and building is the best way. So that's, I think, to paint the picture here, as these guys dive into the really technical aspects is the important part. If you want to go to the next slide, Moreau. So this is Stonecrop Meadows. So this is the master plan. We are This is what I said, 254 units, $30 million in public investment. We had our groundbreaking ceremony last week with the governor, Senator Welch, Treasurer Pichek, Maura and Gus at VHFA and VHCB. Everybody has had a huge role in bringing this one from planning through early COVID eras till today. Next slide. What we started on is this core village. It's the first 80 units, and it comes with a $6 million price tag in infrastructure. And most of this is what we're dedicating back to the town. We received $1 million in a community development block grant to pay for this, $750,000 in the ARPA-funded community recovery and revitalization plan. The town pitched in its entire revolving loan fund balance. And since we're building mixed income housing, it's either then being paid for by the low income housing tax credit program, by the VHCB general fund. We can't pass it on to homeowners because we're already getting subsidy to drop the pricing down to be able to sell these at a place that's affordable outside of Chittenden County, right? So about $75,000 per home of new infrastructure is being built to just get these first 80 units off the ground. And we're 2.5 months into that. It's going great. The annual tax revenue, this is a little bit of back of the envelope, but I think it's a good one based on Middlebury's current tax rate, which by the way is 2.8 per 100. That just went steeply up because there's been no new construction there in a long time. The annual tax revenue at full build out of these first 80 units will be about $450,000, right? And so this is $450,000 on these first 80 units that is otherwise, I mean, this project, but for that state investment, would not have happened. It hasn't happened in a generation. This is the tax revenue against which we're talking about leveraging. If you want to go to the next slide. That's funded. Those first 80 units are funded. We have the stack. The next, this is 104 because there's another 70 units that's going to be across a wetland that we don't quite have permitted yet. But the next 104 units, there's currently no plan for because it just simply doesn't pencil. We have it. We have the town support for it. We have the final plat approval on it. The town has agreed that it can provide the water. It can treat the sewer, but we can't simply can't get the numbers to pencil in a non-Chittenden County community. So, but we can leverage off of what we've already done. This would take about $24,000 per home of new infrastructure. It's another $2.5 to $3 million to build out the infrastructure. And this next 104 units we think would have a grand list value of about $575,000. So combined, full build out here, $1 million per year tax revenue based on our prediction of the assessed values times the 2.8 per 100 tax rate. And some of that's the ed fund, some of that's the municipal tax, but again, round numbers. That is the potential that leveraging future tax dollars can bring to Middlebury. And again, I just will underscore when we talk about robbing the ed fund or trying to populate a fund to make the ed fund whole, but for $30 million in scarce resources from the state, this doesn't happen. And the numbers I calculated, it's not going to happen going forward, right? We're done with our ARPA dollars. We have to find another way to try to stimulate that. I'm going to do the next slide. This is a fun one because we talk about TIF and we talk about infrastructure. And yesterday I got the question from somebody here, I think, what is infrastructure? So this is Stonecrop Meadows. This is an infrastructure plan. All the red, all the blue are water mains and the service lines. The water mains will be town-owned property. The red are sewer mains. The sewer mains will be town-owned property. The white shade, or the neon yellow shading here, is the town road right-of-way. So in that is some stormwater infrastructure, the plantings, sidewalks, streets, that's going to be dedicated to the town. And then these lighter yellow, I'll call them orange, highlights are parks and stormwater ponds that are part of it, right? So this is everything that's off of a building lot. Everything else is what we'd call vertical construction, right? This is all the horizontal construction you'll hear when we talk about what is infrastructure. The vertical construction alone is still nearly penciling or not penciling at all, right? You lump this on and it's impossible to make it work. I think that
When you say doesn't pencil, I assume, am I right? What you mean is what you can get for rents or sale, right? Total won't pay the debt or whatever, won't pay the cost of construction without the infrastructure.
correct, and this is so. I am accused again of diving too deep into the numbers, but these units here are townhomes and duplexes that we're selling through VHFA's middle income homeownership program. So it's 45 units, 37 of them are being sold through that program. And the beauty of that program is it kind of articulates where we are, right? A two-bedroom internal townhome unit that, again, with a lot of this infrastructure paid for from ARPA dollars, is costing us about $525,000 to build. That's a 1,500 square foot two-bedroom, nice, all electric. It's going to appraise for probably $425,000, and to be affordable for people that make 130% of area median income, so above average incomes, right? Which in Addison County, family of three, area median income is right about at $100,000, and so that makes it just easy to do the math. 130% of area median income for a family of three that might move into a two-bedroom is $130,000. To make it affordable with today's interest rates, taxes, insurance, we're pricing those at $358,000. It's costing $525,000 to build. But for VHFA's middle income program, right, we wouldn't be able to sell those today. Now, that may not be true in the next phase, right? Incomes always rise. We've built a lot of the infrastructure to support, and once this neighborhood's established. But that's the stark example of what not penciling looks like right now. There isn't a big enough pool of buyers, and this is the vicious cycle we can talk about because we don't have enough homes, and there's just not a big enough pool of buyers to be able to stimulate a developer to take the risk to try to build homes and sell them in that kind of a market. I stop here.
Great.
But I would take any questions.
Yeah, I think it would be a good place for questions. We do have also, why don't you stay here. Jonah, Richard, we want to show the impact of this type of tool potentially on helping a larger project. We do also have these examples from Village Ventures about several small projects, which I'll just show them quickly. And then I see we have a hand. So this just quickly shows how this is a project in Fairleigh, 26 mixed income apartments, total development cost of $6.5 million. Within that, the infrastructure cost of $250,000. The debt that could be secured by the way we've proposed it with HIT could more than pay for that infrastructure whole. Same thing with a 19 unit, another Fairleigh project, $350,000 in debt for maybe $300,000 in infrastructure costs. And this is a proposed project in Bradford. So I'll pause there.
I don't want to let you off the hook, see? I'm just trying to understand here. Let's just talk about the core village, because I think this is just an example, but you may as well look at the example, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you said we're talking about $75K in infrastructure per house, per unit.
Mm-hmm.
And a TIF district or a tax increment financing yields how much? So that how much of that $75K, all of that $75K could be met with the tax increment? And I might have missed a number here. So that takes $75K essentially off the price, right? But you told us that the difference between what the market could tolerate for a two-bedroom townhome, which is north of $500,000, right? And $130,000 income, excuse me, you'd price it at 350 plus, 360,000. So you're kind of 150 to $200,000 short. Where's that come from?
I think we'd still be able, there would be, so if it's costing us $550,000 to build, you took the infrastructure cost completely off, right? 525,000, and you were able to list those for $450,000. There starts to be a market. That market might be people that make double area median income, right? That 358 is for people that make around 30% of area median income. The beauty, though, still of building homes for people that make double area median income is that they're going to move out of something either locally that's larger or otherwise. It's still like looking through a lens of net new units. We're mixed income builders. We're doing it in partnership with VHFA. That's our model. That's how we're doing it. But overall, the point is adding that financing, adding a financing option that leverages against future tax dollars gives you the opportunity to close some gap. And I heard, sorry, go ahead.
So essentially what you're saying is if you just figure that the townhome would be maybe 450,000 if you take the infrastructure off the table. And these people can pay 350. So you've got a $100,000 gap. One way to do it is just sell to people who have more money. And another is other funds, VHCB, whatever. One way or another, you're hoping you can make the difference up.
Yeah, and what I'll say is, I mean, I hear you reacting to me saying sell it to people who make more money.
No, I'm just trying to figure out what your strategy is here.
Right.
I get that. First of all, I get that you're saying we're not solving the whole problem. We're solving part of the problem. That's fine. I'm just trying to get how big it is.
That's what I'm hearing in this is
Yeah.
my point up at the top that this is a hard time to be building the number of homes we need. Part of that challenge is the infrastructure challenge. This is a solution for that.
Right.
It may be that a bunch of projects can't happen until interest rates come back to a more reasonable rate or until we get some kind of innovation on the construction cost side. Those are additional challenges that we have and that we got to work on to solve. But this would take a substantial chunk of it and create a tool for addressing it.
Some of these are built by Huntington Homes.
Yeah, so those 45 homes are all modularly built. Yep. First one will drop in May.
So that 550 plus that's those homes.
Yeah, 525. Yep.
Okay.
Per unit. And the other thing I would say to that is the alternative in Addison County right now is it's custom homes getting built in Cornwall, right? In the agrarian, second homes in the agrarian parts of the town. I mean, there's really, I did a presentation for the college and we said there were 118 new rental units brought on in the decade leading up in Addison County, right? In the decade leading up to, from 20, I think it was 2012 to 2021, something like that. And the other thing I pointed out was this for using the 40,000 homes figure, Middlebury's pro rata share of that 40,000 homes, it's 1.5% of the population, would be like 550 or 600 homes. We're proposing with a generational investment to do half of that, right? But we also have to do the other half, and we have to do all of it in every other town. And so I would say that the challenge looks enormous, and my challenge to General and Housing yesterday was like everybody holds up the mirror in this all hands on deck moment and says, how can we all chip into bringing down those gaps? I do think leveraging future tax dollars that otherwise are unlikely historically to exist is an option that's done around the country well, and we should really be thinking about it unless we're ready to invest billions and billions.
Please.
And so I'm trying to connect the previous presentation with what we're seeing here now. We're not seeing HIT as articulated in this, correct? What we're looking at is something that's already been a conversation between the town of Middlebury and your own work. So we have, and so I'm sort of taking a minute to try to connect those two things and where might that apply, just so I can better understand how to connect Mr. Weinberger's presentation
Sure.
with your own.
Yeah, and I think this is what Moreau was doing. This slide's really we don't have a financing path forward for the next 140 units that we have permitted, right? And that's because it doesn't pencil right now, and that's going to require $2.5 to $3 million worth of further investment in infrastructure. And so this is where HIT as one of several options we should be looking at, but is a viable path for.
Municipalities did all they could with this revolving loan fund, for example. Like, I'm trying to get a sense of like who's gotten tapped out where. And it sounds like it was one-time ARPA funding. It's also the town making available. It's a balance of a revolving loan fund, and so you see those things being those are maxed out, and so now and now where.
If I could try to say it another way, one of the reasons I was excited about bringing Zeke to you is what I'm understanding is through some extraordinary one-time circumstances, they found a way to get the core village, the 80 units there, into construction. Because of the work they've done already, there's this additional opportunity that you can see there to build another 104 units. It will require $2.5 million more of public infrastructure to do that, and certainly if HIT existed or Spark, or maybe some of the other ways being talked about, the $575,000 in annual revenue would be more than enough to cover that gap.
We do have a question online. Elizabeth, can you hear? Do you have a question?
I do. Ooh,
We hear you.
okay, thank you. I'm sitting by, sorry for the distraction. I appreciate that you have all taken a step back and looked at the need for housing all around our state. And I wonder whether you have had an internal conversation about the schools, the education system and where it's headed, and how will you base your decisions on development based on the outcome of that or the potential outcome of that? For example, I think it's a pretty well accepted idea that families don't move to towns with no schools. So does that mean that you will be more likely to deselect towns that lose their schools, or select towns that are in danger of losing their schools so that you can build them back up? And to what degree are you taking a step back and looking at that statewide, incorporating that into your plans? Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you for that question. And I think that segues well to where we're going to get to in a moment in some of the details of the HIT proposal. When we kind of lay that out, there is a geographic strategy being articulated in the way we've proposed it, in that basically this kind of tool for municipalities and builders would not be available everywhere. We have proposed it being available to communities that are on the maps, that are on the exemption areas that the legislature created last year for exemption areas from Act 250. Certainly would be available to Tier 1 communities when the permanent maps are made. And as we proposed it, there is a Vermont definition for existing settlements that this would be available within a half a mile of any existing settlement. And so I do think, although Representative Burrows, I'm not sure this is, I appreciate your question. I think it is an answer to that this would be encouraging housing in existing communities, places that currently, in many cases, have seen a loss of students. This would be a tool to encourage new homes in those areas that may, I think, in a good case scenario, result in a repopulation of those schools. That being one of the historic drivers that has made school financing so difficult, is the loss of those students. This could help respond to that.
May I, I'll give you an example of my district, where I serve on both the school board supervisory union board and also as a legislator. So I serve the same towns. in both of those scenarios. With the current level of what's been suggested as maintaining only schools with 400 students or more, all of the schools in my district would be shuttered. So, as such, I mean, I'm just wondering whether you're thinking about that. I'm not asking you to make a judgment call on the plan for education. I'm not asking you to, but I'm asking you to really think about what will happen to the settlement patterns in around our state with a school limit of 120, which is 1/4 of what, or a third of what has been suggested now. With 120, we would lose 79 schools. And so, that's a really big impact. And to what degree, it will have an impact on settlement, where people move to and the reasons that people move to those places, and where there are deserts, educational deserts. In my district, for example, if all of the schools close and they're consolidated into one town, what happens to the other towns as far as people moving in? And again, I'm not asking you to answer that question, but I'm asking whether you're taking that into account when you think about the TIF district expansions and where those might, or where those ought to be.
I would
Thank
take.
you.
Go ahead.
Sorry for the long question.
No, I appreciate it, and I believe that, I'm pretty sure, Representative, that I went to at least one of those schools in your district that you're referring to. I guess I just want to make, Let's Build Homes has definitely thought about the question you're asking from this perspective. It does seem to us that if we remain on the current trajectory that we're headed, the choices that we face ahead are grim. We will be forced with these service cutback, very wrenching decisions. The alternative is growth. The alternative is creating new homes that bring more students back into these communities. And I do think the way we have proposed this, and this certainly is something that you could modify, but we have proposed that this is squarely aimed at helping all existing communities in Vermont. That's where this tool could be used. And I do think it could be a substantial force over time for bringing new resources into those existing communities and allowing them to make infrastructure investments that brings additional people and kids back into those throughout the state. Sorry.
No. That was.
We have another question here, yes.
Just following on that same sort of discussion that Representative Burrows was talking about. My districts are pretty small, and it's generally recognized in our district that if the program, for example, your HIT program is only available within the village center or maybe a half mile outside of that, that's not going to cut it in terms of what we need for housing. Personally, I like the concept, but I'm having a hard time understanding how it would be a feasible program to help housing and student enrollment and all that good stuff in some of these small little towns.
Maybe to put a finer point on this, I'm not sure whether it's you guys to answer this or your other witnesses, but you asserted earlier on that this, that HIT, why is it HIT, by the way? Why is
Housing Infrastructure
What's the
Initiative
T?
with the T in initiative. Yes, I'm a little new at this,
Okay, well,
but I thought it was memorable.
Right, okay.
And I like baseball.
one of the things you said that goes to your question is that this would be easier to administer. And one of the concerns, just to put it on the table, that we've had is that much of the development in rural Vermont is 2, 3, 4 units at a time. 5 is a big, very big project. I mean, my town of East Callis is designated that you could put 50 units. No one's even gonna think about 50 units in my town. So I guess I would appreciate I understand that this would work in Burlington, in Chittenden County. And I understand that it would work in Middlebury, maybe with $2 million from the school and a few other things. But, and maybe that's the solution there. But if you're really proposing this as a solution for what is known as rural Vermont, how would it work?
I mean, what I was trying to show with these slides from Jonah, it's unfortunate he can't be here. I mean, he could certainly provide more detail, but Fairleigh, I do think of Fairleigh as a fairly small community in Vermont, and these are not, so I'm not sure this tool does work for a 2-unit development. But here you have a relatively small community where one developer is working on multiple projects that are 26 homes, 19 homes, and there it becomes a meaningful tool is what the intent of these slides. And I was rushing a little bit here, and so I did, just want to draw it out here. I mean, here, part of the challenge here is Bridge and Main needs to come up with $305,000 for infrastructure. The debt that they could secure on the HIT formula would allow $350,000 to be borrowed. And so it would address that piece of the infrastructure challenge. Same thing with the Denison, $550,000 in debt for a $250,000 infrastructure challenge. So to me, and having worked on projects of this scale, it's a big deal to solve a $250,000 challenge when you're trying to do the hard work of putting a project like this together. So there's maybe in other areas where this is not a tool that solves all issues. I do want to circle back to your question point, though. The way we proposed it is with this definition in statute of existing settlement plus these maps. The maps are a really important additional piece of public policy that Let's Build Homes is also going to engage, where I think where this tool could be used could expand over time if through this regional map making process and state map making process we identify areas where we want housing. More could go into the bucket than what we've defined here, but we thought the way to propose this was with those existing definitions.
So I appreciate that. So the focus in terms of land use is for a little town like ours is Tier 2, right? How do you expand housing in Tier 2, and is something like HIT or whatever going to help that or not?
I would take one stab at the chair's question, if you didn't mind. I think to take a big step back, we're just talking about leveraging future tax revenues, right? Because we don't have the cash to invest. That's like at its base what we're talking about here. The top of the pyramid or the top of the funnel, however you want to picture it, is sort of a municipal level TIF. We've done that. I think we're going one step down and making this more available through the HIT program. There are other ways to leverage future tax values through tax abatement, tax freeze, through other. And I think this is like one of those all-in moments, right? I think that as we go from the more complicated programs into more easily administered ones like HIT, we're not going to do a 2-unit development. We're not going to maybe be available for every town, but we're going down that funnel. And I would argue, like, we need to look at the entire funnel right now, but this is one of those sort of programs that in big chunks can start to make the TIF concept more available to more programs. And I think.
Did you, Edie, have a question?
No, I mean, the policy that we're talking about is not the policy that we passed last year, right? So we're building on what we did last year, which is give towns that really want to have housing an opportunity to set their 1B area, right? And so that would be eligible for this. And I think that's really helpful. The only thing that I want to say is, yes, we should have lots and lots of options, and we're at a time where we don't have ARPA dollars, and so we have to find the projects that are going to give us the biggest bang for our buck and make the state benefit more quickly, right, overall. And so, yes, we need to look at how do we make sure that some towns aren't winning over others, and if we do that at the expense of bringing people to the state and making sure we have workforce housing, the whole state will fail. And so we really have to be able to balance that perspective as we're sitting here today.
Other questions for any of the witnesses by members? Yes, please.
I guess just backing up on that point, I'm also another person that represents some of our very, very small rural South Central towns. I am, I don't think that folks are necessarily anti the idea of leveraging our future tax revenue, but I think for the smaller areas, if the whole kind of development landscape is that we are focusing on high density, we still have to think about our rural areas as being land stewards and stewards of our recreation. And we have a lot of housing there that needs a lot of attention. Also, if we are going to see that sector grow, likely that we are going to see some sprawl. So how do we handle that?
So, as we proposed it, and I do wonder if soon you want to have David come up and make sure we're laying out the kind of details of how we proposed it. But again, this is targeted. I think this does have sort of if a goal is to limit sprawl, our thinking as to how this is not driving more sprawl is that this tool can only be used in the exempted areas, the tier 1 areas, or these existing settlements, or very near these existing settlements. And maybe we should do this. It would be interesting if we could find a way to do this, if we created a map. I'm confident if you created that map, it would be a very small percentage of the overall state that would be within that. I believe the action you took last year with the temporarily exempted areas makes up about 2% of the overall land area of Vermont, and adding in these existing settlements. If there's interest in knowing that figure, we should calculate it. We haven't done it. I'd be surprised if it doubled it. That's a little bit of a guess, which may be dangerous to speculate.
It would
but
be helpful information to have.
Okay.
I guess, I lost my train.
No.
I lost my train.
Well,
I'll come
we
back.
can come back to you.
Okay.
I just want to reflect back before, if you have witnesses who would get into detail, that's great. What I'm hearing from you, and I'm going to put words in your mouth, is we have to kind of, as you said, we need a lot of different tools. The development that you showed us wouldn't have happened without ARPA and Middlebury College, so going forward, we need whatever works. A piece of that is tax increment. It may not be everything, but it's a piece of it. The device that you've proposed, it works for medium-sized and somewhat smaller projects. It works for a 19-unit project. It works for a 20-something unit project. It may not work for a 40-unit project, but at least we've gotten down that far, which may mean that in some places where we've never built 20-unit projects, we might have to start thinking about building 20-unit projects, but whatever, it works down that far. Getting further down might take devices such as tax abatement, which is simpler and easier way of injecting money into a pro forma, a developer's pro forma, or something like that. And that what I'm hearing you say, and you said it yesterday, Zeke, is that what we're really struggling against is that no development pencils right now, with or without infrastructure, no development pencils in a way that would allow a nurse or a teacher or someone like that to buy a house or buy a unit. And that's why nothing's happening, is because the market isn't there, except, as you started in your, except, $800,000 houses or $1 million houses on 10 acres of land somewhere, which of course is not what we want. Is that accurate?
Yeah, and the way I would reframe that is we need to pull all the levers, right? We don't have cash levers really anymore. And each lever won't work for every town and every project, right? And some are of varying complexity. this is a lever we should pull, hit, and this sort of, this type of tax increment financing, as is tax abatement, because that's a lever you pull that does a different thing. We shouldn't take one project, say it doesn't fix everything, and throw it out. We should take that project, that proposal, and then take the next one that fixes, So that's where I would say this is really a moving down through the funnel of fixing the problem. And this for a lot of communities is going to be a great solution. And then there are a lot of other solutions that are going to be great for other communities, whether you're trying to build a few units at a time and your developers, there are only a handful of developers that do projects the size we do, but there are a lot of people that would like to do those smaller projects. So I would say it's a pull every lever right now.
Did you, go ahead, please. Did you figure out what it was you forgot?
I sure did. Got right back on track. So the HIT product, is it time limited at all? Because I didn't really get a sense of a time limit.
Great. I mean, the way we've proposed it, any one project would have a limit for, they would be able to capture the new revenue for 20 years, up to 20 years is the way we propose it.
But David White can come up and tell us all about it, right?
Yes.
I was going to say that might be a good segue.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great idea to get in the question. I think you'll get the answer to that.
Why don't we move
There's no time limit on the length of the program. This would become a permanent program as we
we have, I'm gonna just say it's 2:05. We've got to be on the floor at 3 and we have to get there.
Okay.
So I think we should literally walk out here at 1:15. That way we'll get, maybe get a gold star. Anyway.
Yes, we're not there.
Yeah, we're not there. So, well, I don't even think she's wandering over here, so our gold star fairy is not with us. But, so I think if you want David White to come up and talk, here you are, good, do it.
Great. So good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for having us here. For the record, I am David White. I'm president of White & Burke Real Estate Advisors, on a volunteer basis, working with Monroe and Let's Build Homes to try to foster more housing development statewide. Very quickly, by way of background, I've been involved in doing community development work in Vermont since 1980. I've had my own company since 1990. My career started here in Montpelier when I was the founding executive director of a nonprofit downtown revitalization organization and went on to be director of community development for the city before my career advanced. I also have a master's degree in community economic development. So this is what we're talking about here is very much at the core of what I do and have done all of my career. And as I look at where we stand today and the challenges we're facing, I think the HIT program is a tool. It doesn't solve, as we've been talking, every problem, but it can be a substantial tool that can make a big difference in terms of closing the financial gap. And I think that's the key here that we need to focus on. I will say that in theory, at least, there's no reason why it couldn't be used for a two-unit project. I mean, if you take a 2-unit project that is going to generate, I don't know what it would be in an individual town, but let's say it's going to generate, $20,000 a year in taxes, and 16,000 of that, 80%, is available to the HIT program. That 16,000 in turn could leverage in a 20-year bond or a 20-year note of some sort, could probably leverage, a couple $100,000. And if that project needed an extension of a water line that cost $150,000, you've solved that problem. Now, there's a little bit of administration involved here. You do have to go, as we've proposed it, through VEPSI and so forth, but as one of the things you'll hear is that we have, in our proposal, the way we've put this together, even the VEPSI process would be simplified. We'll get to that detail in a moment, but there's absolutely no reason why it couldn't work at a smaller level. And to the question of small towns, I will add that, one of the advantages of this tool is that it's entrepreneurial. And by that I mean, it's not top down, it's bottom up. It means that in any individual town, whether it's East Calais or whether it's Fairleigh or whether it's Fairhaven, in each town, if there's a project that the town wants to see happen and there's a developer they're trying to work with to make it happen, they can then be the ones who make this tool to bring the tool in to help solve the problem and make that project feasible. This isn't one where somebody from above is saying, well, we're going to allocate the funds here or there or the other place. No, it is where it's bottom up, and each community, if they choose, can use this tool. And I think that's one of the special aspects of it. So with that background, let me say that let me walk through some of the key elements of the way we have envisioned this. And clearly, you and others, committees and so forth, will work on it, massage it, and may change it. But this is where we are, at least today. So first, in terms of eligibility, it would have to be eligible to use this, it would have to be in a geographically eligible area. And Moreau talked a little bit about that. I'll hit on again in just a moment. Secondly, at least half of the floor area would have to be allocated to housing. And the reason why it's not 100% is because in many of our villages and towns, the first floor is supposed to be commercial. And you need to allow that you can have, the housing on the upper floors while having commercial on the first floor, or else it won't match zoning and it can't happen. So at least 50% of allocated housing. And then you also, in each instance, there needs to be a negotiated agreement between the municipality and the developer, where they've spelled out very clearly who's doing what in terms of how much of the incremental taxes will be utilized. Is the town going to borrow the money and install the infrastructure, or is the developer going to borrow the money and install the infrastructure, and how does all that work? And so there needs to be a negotiated agreement that is executed on a contractual basis. And then also, to another point that Moreau made earlier, we're not talking about a district here, we're talking about a project. Now, the project may be, as it stands today, on one or more parcels, but they need to be contiguous. And contiguous could include across an existing public street or right-of-way. But we're talking about a project. Now, the project might be phased in, similar to the Middlebury project, phase 1 getting underway now, and a future phase, but it's planned as a single project. And you're not talking about then the complications of having to administer an entire district and all of those other projects and all of the properties in the district and ongoing repeated returns to VEPSI for, well, we're amending the district this way or that way and so forth. You're doing one project, you're negotiating one deal, and borrowing money and doing the infrastructure and moving forward. So locations, I won't spend a lot of time on it, but the Tier 1 areas that will ultimately be selected through on the Act 250 maps, the temporary areas that were established through Act 181, existing settlements, which by the way is defined in the Act 250 statutes. It's in Title 10 VSA 6001 sub 16 or something, which is the definitions. It basically means the cores of our villages and towns. I do have a copy of the actual definition with me if you're interested, but also allowing for a little bit of growth beyond that, not just within. So if there happens to be a vacant property right next to it and the town is envisioning, that could be a good housing location, that would be eligible. Move on. So what are the costs? First would be public infrastructure, and this would include what is already defined within the TIF statute. I don't have the entire list here with me, but it is water and sewer and streets and sidewalks. It could be public parks. It's whatever is needed to make that project move forward. In downtown, sometimes it means parking. There's a range of different types of public infrastructure. In addition to that, although under TIF, brownfield remediation is permitted as an expense, it's actually not explicitly spelled out, and so may as well add that explicitly. And then also, given all the issues we have with flooding in recent years, that flood resiliency measures would also be allowed and permitted.
Is this, one quick question. So this is not, one of the ways this is different than Spark is you couldn't use it for the development cost.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Now, I happen to like that element of Spark, that you can put it directly in, because then it starts to solve one of the other problems that Zeke was talking about, where there's still a financial gap. And so you could certainly consider about, including that element in here, but it's not part of it as we've originally envisioned it. We were a little bit more conservative than the administration in terms of their vision. But yes, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, in that way, this is more like the traditional TIF, where, having worked with TIF many times, I've always found it compelling that we're talking about using these public revenues for public infrastructure, that they're not paying for the private improvements, they're not really subsidizing the developer, they're finding a way for the public, what needs to be happening on the public side to get built. So, given the moment we're in, I think thinking about something that goes farther, like Spark does, as the governor's proposed, I understand that. Having worked with taxpayers a lot over the years, I find it quite compelling to be able to say, this is allowing the public entities to do their job of providing the public infrastructure for this. This is not subsidizing the developer.
So, as we've already said, we're saying up to 80% of the incremental new state and local property taxes for a period of up to 20 years. Now, I want to elaborate on this. Moreau touched briefly earlier, but I think this is an important point. Because we're talking about borrowing money once to install the infrastructure, you will know up front what your debt service schedule is going to be over time, and you'll know what that cost is. And so if 80% of your taxes in year one are sufficient to cover that debt service, and as tax rates inevitably go up, we all know there will be increasing revenue, you do not need to retain that increased amount. You do not need to use that for debt service. And so there, over time, we would expect that both the education fund and the local municipal general fund will start to receive those increasing revenues because, again, unlike a TIF district where you capture all of those revenues for the life of the district, allowing you to invest in further debt instruments to do further public infrastructure, here we're talking about one debt instrument you know up front, you spell that out in the development agreement or the infrastructure agreement with the developer, and you basically can fix that schedule for the life of the 20 years, and you start to see growing benefit go to the regular taxing authorities.
Question, I know this is detailed, but given what we've been hearing, I think it's worth it. So let's take a project that takes 3 years to build.
Yes.
Another couple of years to sell. So it's 4 or 5 years before it's reached a point that it's operating, stabilized. When is the bond issue?
So typically that would happen up front because you've got to install the infrastructure up
And it
front.
would be based on the estimate of the stabilized production.
Yes,
So you might sell it at day one in order to start building the infrastructure.
yes,
But it would be sold to whomever would buy it at assuming this stabilized amount
yes.
at year 5. Okay. So
You're saying
then,
selling the debt or selling the units?
selling the units would be being sold, but you would
You're talking about
sell
the debt.
bonds.
Yeah, sell
okay,
bonds.
sorry, thanks.
Okay. So what you're saying is, well, actually, the tax revenues over time might go above that amount
Yes,
because tax rates go up,
tax rates go up.
because value goes up.
Well, over the course of my decades of owning a home in Vermont, the tax rate has gone up every single year, and I end up paying more taxes, not because the value of my home's gone up necessarily, but because simply the tax rate to cover the cost of municipal services and education services.
So, but reassessments could also, on the
Yes.
basis of increasing, I mean, we talk about the grand list increasing in size. That's not because we're building more housing, it's because the price of housing is going up, in part.
The nominal value, yes.
Yeah, the nominal value.
Yes.
So, yeah, I know. Okay, so what you're saying is, over time, that extra amount would be captured in the traditional way, some of it going to the ed fund, some of it going to the town.
Correct. But to your earlier point, which I think is an excellent one, and again, we're getting into the weeds here, but it's a legitimate and important point. One of the biggest challenges in TIF districts in Vermont today is the early years, when the municipalities incurred the debt and are starting to pay on it before they, maybe several years before the tax revenue is received. So how do you cover that negative cash flow? And that's a challenge in every single TIF district when you first set it up. And it will be a challenge here as well for exactly the same reason that there's a disconnect in terms of the time there. There are a lot of tools that
Can you borrow?
you can make your an interest only during those early years, and you start amortizing later. The agreement with the developer in this case could allow for, you would do projections. Every TIF district has projections. I spent a lot of my time doing that kind of work. And you anticipate what the time is when those revenues will start to hit the tax rolls. And so there'll be a deficit for a period of time. Is the deficit one that the municipality can manage through its pooled cash or not? In which case, maybe you can't borrow as much money. And then at what point are the tax revenues enough not just to pay the current debt service, but to start to repay that cumulative deficit? And so that's all. We don't need to get a lot into that, but yes, that is an absolutely legitimate challenge, but one that there are tools. They're as good as I would like them to be, but we've managed so far in every TIF district to figure out how to get over that hurdle. And I'm confident with this kind of tool, we could do it as well, although it is challenging.
I would say just hopefully it's not 5 years from the moment when you're incurring the debt before you have new revenue start playing. I mean, usually it's more like 1 to 2 years. But although maybe the project, it may well be 5 years or more before a project's fully built out.
Right.
But yeah.
And also, we'll get to it in a moment, but Murrow's already referenced one of the options here is have the developer incur the debt and have a tax rebate to cover that portion of the developer's debt that relates to the infrastructure. If that tool's used, the developer's got the cash flow problem, not the municipality.
Can the developer, but then it's not tax refinancing?
It would not be tax-free financing, that's
Even
correct.
though it's public project, it would lose its tax refinancing?
Now, there may be a tool here, and this is worth exploring, and I don't know if Michael Gaughan is on or not, but of doing private purpose municipal bonding that could be done. And I can't say I'm an expert in that area. Michael Gaughan, I hope, is. But that is one of the disadvantages. If the developer borrows the money, it's not tax-free, and certainly the interest rate will be higher than if it's a municipal bond.
Although I think I'm not completely expert in this area either, but I believe the spread between the tax-free bonds and the taxable is not
right now, no.
may not be enormous.
Yeah,
So.
it varies.
Yeah.
So in terms of financing, very quickly, won't spend a lot of time because it's already been touched on. One is the municipality borrows the money, and the municipality then either directly does the infrastructure project or perhaps contracts with the developer for the developer to do it, but it's municipal debt. More similar to what the way TIF is handled now. It'd be a general obligation bond, presumably, and so forth, would require a public vote and all that process. An alternative would be to use an entity like the Vermont Municipal Bond Bank or perhaps VEDA, the Vermont Economic Development Authority, to issue the bonds directly, and there would be their debt, not municipal debt, and that they'd be relying on the payments of the agreement with the municipality for that portion of the tax revenue to come back to them to pay that debt service. And then the third one is this developer option, where the developer borrows the money and they get a tax rebate. They pay their full taxes, but they get a tax rebate to pay that portion of the debt that's related to the public infrastructure investment. And I did a fair amount of research on this, and there are all but a handful of states in America have some form of tax increment financing. Very few do not.
I think all but one have some form of.
All but one or two, something like that, yeah, I think have some form. Of those states that have it, 32 of them actually allow this mechanism where the developer borrows the money and gets a tax rebate to pay it. It's a very, very common mechanism. It's referred to, why this term, I don't know, it's referred to as pay-as-you-go, is the way it's generically referred to. It's just, to my mind, a funny kind of way of terming it, but states as diverse as Ohio and Texas and Alaska and Maine and Massachusetts all allow that mechanism. So it's not some kind of radical idea to actually have the developer borrow the money and do a tax rebate.
I think that's it.
Okay.
We have one more
questions?
slide on ours.
You have one more slide?
Yeah, oversight tech.
Oh, there
Sorry
we go.
about that.
Yeah, okay. I thought there was more. That's me trying to hit the button rather than letting Moreau do it. Okay, so very quickly in terms of just the logistics and administration and so forth, one is that as I referenced, to do this, there would have to be a contract between the developer and the municipality that spells out all the terms. Secondly is particularly because many municipalities really don't have the in-house expertise to figure out how to negotiate this. They're going to want to bring in some kind of expertise to assist them with negotiating the agreement. There'll probably be an attorney who needs to be involved, for example. There probably needs to be somebody to do the number crunching to help them figure out how the cash flow works and so forth. Those costs would be eligible as project costs that could be bonded and paid for through this mechanism. Thirdly, we have, in our proposal, we think that this should be a very straightforward system that would, rather than having to go to the full VEPC board for approval, that the VEPC staff were suggesting could have the authority to approve this under most circumstances. If they felt uncomfortable for some reason with one and wanted the board to make a judgment, they could do that. And also, in the circumstance where a community is saying we want to do this in an existing settlement, because the other two eligible categories are actually mapped. You're either physically in or not. An existing settlement requires a judgment call as to whether or not it's within what would be qualified. That would have to go to the VEPC board for a determination as to whether or not they agree it's within an existing settlement. But otherwise, the VEPC staff can review the agreement with the municipality, can review the cash flow projections, can review the eligibility requirements, and it pretty much is going to be checked black or white. Yes, it qualifies as, or it doesn't qualify in terms of at least 50% of the floor area and so forth. And so it'd be a faster and more expeditious process, not as laborious as the current TIF process.
Question?
Yeah, so I'm just getting back to the issues around eligible geographic areas and eligible costs. And I can't say that I'm real familiar with some of these projects, but I've certainly heard of projects that are maybe a little smaller scale, 5, 10 units, that kind of thing, outside of a village center. And it's not necessarily public infrastructure, but there's community wastewater facilities, so you combine some things. And I'm just wondering whether, I don't know, from my perspective, those limitations on geographic area and real public infrastructure, this is kind of private, not in a village center. Why would you want to do that?
So if I may, take a stab at that. So much of public policy in Vermont for the last 20 years really has been focused on trying to prevent sprawl and to try to focus development within its core village and historic areas. And so we've tied that to this with that philosophy in mind. Certainly the legislature could choose, in this instance, no, housing's so important, we're going to get rid of those geographic limitations. But we approached it from the, because right now this is an idea.
Yeah. Can I just follow up there?
Please.
So there are those state policies, in different land use areas, but you're proposing a new program that doesn't necessarily have to tie to
It doesn't necessarily.
1A and 1B. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a true, municipal wastewater or whatever. It could be, something that is still community.
A community system.
Right.
I like that. I think that I like your question, and probably one more thought, that are there kind of, are there, if we're getting serious about making this a tool, is there work to be done to make sure that rural applications are fully addressed? And I think that's a great, I'm not sure that we don't have legal language yet. As the legal language is being refined, making sure that a community wastewater, community sewer was an eligible cost, I think is a great suggestion. We were trying to anticipate, in tying this to the geographically the way we were trying to anticipate possible objections to this. If the legislature is ready to go beyond those sort of traditional the way that you were thinking about it with the map making last year, we you know, this is us trying to make this something that can get passed, is why we have that in there. We want homes built.
Thank you.
Yes.
Can I ask a question not related to this topic or this proposal, but just because I have both of you here and other witnesses, a few of us around this table have talked about current TIF as is and the 2 project cap per county. And in the spirit of there is no silver bullet to fix this, do you feel that maybe an interim exemption from that cap would be beneficial in housing? Is that something that would be worth our time discussing?
I would say absolutely yes. You know, that came about because a number of years ago, I'm blanking on exactly when it was, but a decade or so ago, TIF was dead in Vermont. No new TIF districts were allowed whatsoever. And I was involved with others in coming back to the legislature saying, look, this is a powerful tool. Can we, you know, reopen TIF? And there was so much controversy at the time. It was a political compromise that led to no more than actually 2 per county, no more than 6 total new ones above those that already existed at that point, and no municipality that has an existing TIF can get a new one until they've paid off 100% of the debt on their existing TIF or TIFs. And I happen to think that all 3 of those are a serious mistake, that it is absolutely one of the single most powerful economic tool this state has, and that we don't use it adequately. So I totally support getting rid of those limits.
I'm wondering, just following up on that question, if you took existing TIF and you lifted the limit and so that people could, if they wanted to, define a project-based TIF, what's missing? How is that really different? I guess what you're saying is we'd want to make the administration simpler, so we'd provide for certain size projects. We'd have to decide about eligibility, but it sounds, looking at what you've done, it doesn't sound like that impossible to tweak TIF as it is. I don't know, what do you think?
Well, I think that there's similarities, and I suppose there's a way of integrating the statute, but one of the keys here is that it is simply a defined single project, not a district. So they start from a fundamentally different place. And so I see them as parallel statutes. And particularly, we very much had the smaller communities in mind as we were designing this. You know, and TIF is sufficiently complicated that really, as a practical matter, only the larger municipalities are likely to ever use it. But this could be used by almost any municipality in the state of Vermont.
When you were modeling for small towns, what was your model small town?
I have not modeled a small town, just to be clear. I've talked to the number of small towns, because we're not talking about modeling the town itself. It really is the individual project. And so I would need to have a specific project, and then we could model it.
I
Yes.
guess my modeling question is that project would also be based on a particular town's population, right? So I keep hearing Fairhaven being cited as a small town, which it is by our standards, but I represent micro towns that have like 600 people.
Sure.
So, and I'm not hearing a lot of understanding how these types of things would help with municipalities that are that small.
Well, it's not materially different, because it would be different if we're talking about a TIF district. But in a case where we're talking about this, where we're talking about a project, and a community that has only a population of 600 could still come in with a project for 10 units, let's say, hypothetically. It could even be, as I said earlier, it could be 2 units, and say this particular project we want to have happen, and we want to use this tool to pay for bringing in the water line or the sewer line, or potentially paying for the community septic system that will be there for that project. So it absolutely could be done. But each one of these you have to model because there are going to be different tax rates in that community. There are going to be different costs for the infrastructure. There's going to be different value for the taxable value for the individual private project that would generate the taxes. So they're each modeled uniquely. The methodology is the same.
I think what you said earlier is key. So let's take the hypothetical town that has a project of 3 houses and a population of 1,000 people. So they don't have anybody. I mean, I know from my town, until we just recently hired a wonderful town administrator, I mean, like, there's nobody
Right.
who could do anything other than say, oh, that's a good idea. I mean, that's about it. So what I think you're saying is, we could hire somebody, we'll get to that, could hire the lawyers, the people who could do the pro forma, that is the spreadsheet, all that stuff, and the costs of doing that, say that costs $20,000. The cost of doing that would be a cost that could be put into the bonds. So when you sell the bonds would have those costs in it. It wouldn't cost the town a cent.
Correct.
Right? Who hires the lawyers and who does that? I mean, somebody, let's hypothesize. I mean, I don't mean to criticize small towns. I love my small town. But I'm not sure that many small towns have the capacity to go out and look for somebody and hire somebody who's reputable and make sure that they are doing a good job and that they're not just getting taken for a ride. Who is that?
So I think you've got a bunch of opportunities. One of them is, we've got Charlie Baker here from the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission, but it's the regional planning commissions, I think.
Here from VLCT too.
And I was going to talk about Josh. I saw Josh walk in. Vermont League of Cities and Towns that has a technical support program, and the regional economic development corporations. I mean, all of those do have the capacity, maybe not to do the work themselves, but to help find the right consultants or attorneys or what have you to come in and do that. And I imagined here, and I haven't had conversations with any of the regional planning commissions or with VLCT about this, but where they say, we will do this on your behalf, negotiate this deal, and we want to charge you a small fee as well to cover our costs.
And that would be bondable as well.
Yes, it would all be bondable under this. So new revenue streams for VLCT and the regional planning commissions to help provide this support to the smaller communities.
I will say that is not foreign in the sense that many small towns now issue bonds through the bond bank. And the costs of issuing the bonds are substantially part of the bond issue, so the town doesn't have to pay for the lawyer or the economic advisor. It's paid for by the bonds
But that's
mostly.
if it passes, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Little details.
Right. Is right now.
An important detail to focus on. One of the reasons we've worked hard to say, as I understand Vermont law, maybe even the Constitution, if it is general obligation debt that you are bonding for, it requires a town vote. If we are talking about these developer financing or possibly other types of municipal debt that is not general obligation debt or debt from entities that's not the city taking on debt, as we've tried to lay out here as an option, that would require, as we've proposed it, the legislative body to sign off on it, but it does not, since you're not putting this on property taxpayers, you don't have to go for a referendum.
Can you, and then I think we are getting close to the,
Can I do it? So I really like the streamlining idea. I like to figure out how we can do that in a way that is still safe, right? We're still thinking about so some kind of an administrative checklist of, yes, all of these things are in line. The staff at VEPC can ensure that that's the case. Have we talked to them at VEPC to see if this is something that they have the capacity to do? I know we could obviously hear from them in testimony, but I'm curious if you've had that conversation.
We've had a little bit of conversation, and VEPC, as I understand it, certainly the head of VEPC is supportive of Spark, and they've proposed there being VEPC involvement and oversight there, and if anything, the way we've proposed it is a little bit more streamlined and less burdensome, and they have indicated that that made sense to them, that Pepsi playing a role there as well. So I think that would work.
Joe?
Thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to put my thought out there of we're all kind of on the same playing field of we have a housing problem, a housing crisis. We're not building them. What we've been doing for 20, 30 years has got us to where we are today. Nibbling around the edges of the exact same programs that we've been doing for 30 years maybe helps, but you have to think bigger than that. And for me, it's been overused, but I'll overuse it again. The yes and thing of, yeah, this does seem like a great problem. And I don't think a town with 600 people is going to use it. I don't think my small town probably, this isn't going to be a big thing for us. But that's what I just put in the minds of everybody, the property valuation freeze as something that's excellent for the small towns. A very easy front-loaded system where the town doesn't become the person taking out a loan, paying it, and coming up with a scheme of how to figure it out. You just say, that property stays at the same value for the next 10 years. That'll help the developer or the private landlord who has the cash flow to get a builder in there to put something up, to make their numbers pencil out. And the town doesn't have to worry about penciling out numbers other than, it'll stay the same for 10 years. So
if there's the will to do that, but I think that your last point is the key one there. If there's the will to do that and commit to it for an extended period of time, 15, 20 years, or at least 10 years.
10, I think 10's a good number.
Then that is a length of time that is sufficient and that you would get all the benefits and more of what we've talked about here, and that projects could be planned around that, and that would be bankable, and that would be something developers would be able to, go to their bankers with, and you could, if infrastructure was needed, you would have a source to get it done, or you would fix these other ones. What I've heard directly from developers is if it's only a short-term abatement like the one that was in last year's bill of 3 years, that is not a sufficient time to really move the needle on projects.
10 years.
10 years?
I think it lines up well with the
10 years
like
is substantial for sure. I think a lot of sorry.
I was just going to say it lines up well with a program like VHIP where after that 10-year span.
I would say, I don't know about yours, I think a lot of commercial development, project development ends up being, having an amortization period over 15 or 20 years or even longer sometimes, and you get the sort of full value out of it if you had an abatement that matched up with that, but certainly 10 years would be substantial.
I think we are very close to when we have to wrap up. Is there any final thing you want to say? We really, I think, have to go in a minute or two or wind up.
I don't have I really appreciate this opportunity for this extended discussion. Appreciate all the questions. Hope that's an indication there's interest, and would just say we got a couple pieces of homework to do and follow up on for this, but we're here to be a resource for you and do a lot more if there is interest in continuing this conversation.
You are working on language?
We proposed, and working with Representative Bartley, we submitted sort of an outline of what the legislation might look like. That was largely what we showed to you today. Our hope was that, our understanding was, the Legislative Council was taking it from here.
Chair Marcotte, do you have anything you want to add?
Not at the moment, but it's given us some food for thought, I think.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time, and everybody in the audience who I know sat through this and didn't testify. I hope this was worthwhile for you, and I think we can safely say we are adjourned.